ventures. So without further ado, I defer this part to Derek. Thank you so much for, oh, and he is the son of Patty Goodemo. How can I forget that? Brother of Kirk McGee as well, so here you go.
Oh, thank you so much. The book's actually not in print anymore, so you can't order it. But I can send you a PDF if you're interested. I am mostly now a stay-at-home dad, but I still work about 5 days a year for the Clearwater. So a couple days in April, a couple days in May, and a couple days, 1 or 2, maybe in June. And that's where I was when I got the invite from Pastor Louise to come do this talk. And my first thought, as I expressed to Jen and Delilah, was, doesn't he know this is my crazy time of year at work? And Jen and Delilah pointed out that because it was Memorial Day weekend, I actually had a 15-day weekend and that I should be able to squeeze it in. So here I am. And the way I got to start working for the Clearwater is kind of interesting. It goes all the way back to when I first got out of the Marines, came back from Iraq, and I went to work in finance at Merrill Lynch as a financial advisor. And the office was very competitive, but I did team up with one other woman once. And what we did was we rented the Clearwater. And we took it out because it was in the fall. It was like maybe early October. It was just peak foliage. The river was gorgeous. We were going to go down at a beacon to go down around Bannerman Castle. Just an absolutely wonderful place to ask people if they've thought about their 401k recently. And one of the things, the thing that stuck out most about the boat to me, though, was I was watching this crew, and they were just running around sailing this giant wooden boat. I don't know if you've seen the Clearwater. It's a 110-foot wooden sloop. It takes a lot of work. And they were running around, and then they showed me their sleeping quarters, and it was just horrid. They were just packed into one room, right? These bunks practically on top of each other. There was no, screens, no door, nothing. There was no privacy, no personal space. They were just all living right on top of each other. And then shortly later, when I got laid off from Merrill Lynch because of the financial crisis, the first thing I did was walk down to, or I drove to the Clearwater office and said, you got to get me on that boat, because those horrid conditions look like home to me, right? That felt like something that I was missing, or that was going to scratch an itch. Because I think sometimes in America, our goals are off. If you think about what we're trying to achieve in life, it's to get enough money that we can buy a big enough place where everyone gets their own room separated from each other in their own space. And you want to get a big enough yard that you can put up a fence that pushes back any neighbors so you don't have to see or hear anyone else. And that's what we strive to achieve, right? We think of ourselves as just, we aspire to be fiercely independent. But I don't think that's the way that we work best as a people. I think we're at our best when we're with a group or a team, family, tribe, whatever you want to call it, club, working towards a common goal, right? And feeling like we're contributing to that goal. I think that's when we shine the best. I don't think we're like tigers, which we like to imagine, where they are solitary and territorial, and they have a big area, and they keep all the other tigers out, and they think, I never got any help. I didn't need anything. I don't need anybody. And that's what's sort of heroic in our minds. But really, I think we're more like lions, where we are just best when we're just in a pile of friends and family sleeping under a tree for 20 hours a day. But I mean, not quite 20 hours a day, but I'm starting to use the lion analogy, because I used to just say find your herd, but from a marketing standpoint, the sheep reference isn't as good as like a lion pride, like find your pride. But there's tons of options. You could go with pod, pack, Congress if they're ferrets. But I can speak for myself when I say that I don't do well alone. I've seen me, right? If you put me alone, right, when I got out of the military, put me alone in an apartment somewhere, and I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll eat cold clam chowder out of the can. All right, the dishes will pile up. The laundry won't get done. I'll smoke in bed. I'll drink till I fall asleep. This is how I am by myself. But you put me in a platoon or a crew or a team or a family, and that's when I will shine. That's when I will really come through. And I think a lot of us are like that. And I think to find happiness, I think the real secret is not money, but it's more learning to trust, to join, and contribute, right? So it doesn't necessarily matter what it is that you're joining and trusting and contributing to, right? It doesn't have to be something where you smell feet all the time. It can be just a club or a church. Church is a great one. But feel like you belong and feel like you're contributing to that group. And that's, Elon Musk is the richest man in the world, and he's known for sleeping in his office. And people think it's because of his work ethic, but I think he's just lonely. I think he just wants to be with the team. Just to make a point about how money doesn't fix everything. Speaking of contributing, for what I did to contribute to the Clearwater when I went to work there all those years ago on the boat, and I don't work on the boat now, I work from the shore periodically, but when I went to work on the boat, was I had just gotten back and I had been a navigator in the Marines. And I'll tell you, the difference between a terrible navigator and a good navigator is that a good navigator doesn't let on that they're lost. They just keep marching confidently forward until they recognize something. And that's about the only difference. So I volunteered to teach their navigation group because that was what the Clearwater did. Aside from moving the boat from A to B, they did environmental education for mostly kids, school kids. And so I volunteered to teach navigation because this is something I knew and I was all excited. And I took these kids and I was like, okay, here's your compass and you got to take an azimuth and don't forget about the declination. And then you can do an intersection or a resection, which is basically both forms of triangulation. And I kind of just felt like I lost them. I wasn't. So I really thought it over and, I'd always been told to simplify things in the military. So I came back, I put some of that the Marine mindset, and I came back to them the next day or the next time I taught a class, and I said, okay, I'm going to teach you guys 3 words, and this is how they do it in the Marines. I said, I'm going to teach you 3 words, and I want you to repeat these 3 words after me over and over again. And when that's done, when you memorize these 3 words, you will be able to navigate a boat through any coastal or river waterways here in the United States. And they were a bit incredulous. And so the words I taught them, and I made them repeat, were read, write, return. And I make them say it over and over again, just like we did in the Marines. Finally, they would get it memorized, and I'd say, okay, great. Now you guys are like 3/4 of the way to being a captain, which the captain hated. But I wanted to make them, feel excited about it. And then I had to give it context, right? Because it's nothing without context. But the point is that you take these 3 words, read, write, return, and you can extrapolate from that all that you need to navigate. So when you're returning, right, which means going out from the deep water towards shore or up a river, you keep the red buoys on your right? So that's read, write, return. But you can extrapolate from that, well, if the red buoys are on my right, then if I find a green buoy, I'm going to keep that on my left. The channel will be between that. And then you can flip it around and say, well, if I'm leaving, then the red buoy would be on the left. Whatever, you get the idea. You can extrapolate everything, and all you have to do is remember just those 3 words. And I was thinking about it. In a way, that's a bit of what goes on in Christianity, where this tradition that started back with the people that wrote the New Testament, the later part of the New Testament, all the way up to Pastor Louise, is, see, Jesus wasn't around for a really long time, and he only said a small number of things that were actually written down and copied and saved to today. And so you have these words that you need to extrapolate a whole system for living, through navigating through life, and you just have these few words. And I think, a great example of where you can do this is in Matthew 7:12, which is a great one because there's a corroborating witness in Luke 6:31. They both say the same thing. And that's the golden rule. So I'll paraphrase, but do unto others as you'd have done unto you. And if you think about it, if that's all that you had to go on, if that's it, you had that one rule, those words, that lesson from Jesus, and you set about extrapolating a whole system, you could get a pretty good, close to Christian life out of just that. So I was going to share with you one other example of a few words that have had a big impact. And this is, I kid you not, these are 5 words that were said to me as an insult in boot camp, and they have literally changed everything about how I view the world. That is not an exaggeration. And so when you are in boot camp, it's like formatting a drive, right? They take your brain and they kind of wipe it clean and they start off. And so the lessons you learn there can sometimes really stick. And that's what happened to me this time. I was messing something up, and the drill instructor said angrily, "Oh, there's always that 10%. And the context there is what they tell you is that the Marines tries very hard to keep out undesirables, right? They have a very, strict process of letting people in, no criminals, no drug addicts. And then they do all kinds of screening. And then they have boot camp where they try to weed out weak people, and they do a lot of different things that will test your honesty. And then they wipe you clean and they try to instill integrity and honor and discipline. But they tell you there's always going to be the 10%. 10% will always get through. There is always that 10%. And that really stuck with me. And later on, I started thinking, well, this can be applied to any large group, right? Any large group has 10%. And of people that are just rotten. Now, it's a somewhat arbitrary number, 10. There's not studies to back up that 10% of people are lousy. But you get the idea. A small number of any group is going to be lousy. No matter what that group does to try to get rid of them, they're going to be in there. And that can't, and they can't help that. But where things got interesting was later. Oh, and I also was going to say, I applied it to a lot of groups, like where I began to realize that the problem that group is having with their reputation in the world is that they have an organization that defends that 10% instead of letting them face the consequences. And then that hurts the reputation of a group. But that group is, 90% of all police, 90% of all military people, 90% of all priests are all good. But by sort of closing ranks and protecting that 10, it's given them a bad reputation. And I think that's what the military and the police need to do, is make sure they let the, they say, yeah, you're right, that guy is no good. He is a war criminal. And let them face the consequences. But where it got interesting was when I was in Iraq, and we had this insurgency that was hiding in the population, and we were frustrated. People, we had been there for years. The people were sick of it. They hardly had power. I mean, if people don't have lights working, they don't care about democracy, right? They just want the simple things. And we weren't able to give it to them because these insurgents were knocking it out. But then these people who didn't like that the insurgents were doing were still helping them because they were afraid. And people were getting frustrated. A lot of guys started seeing, including myself, started seeing everybody as the enemy. And somewhere in there, it hit me, because I have this mathematical axiom in my brain. There's always 10%, not 9, not 11. It hit me. There's always that 90%. right? If the first part is true, I can extrapolate out that there's always 90% of any group is good. And that is a lot harder for people to wrap their heads around, because that means 90% of Chinese, Russians are enemies. 90% of them are good. 90% of Russians and 90% of Ukrainians are good. And this one's going to blow people's mind. That political party that you don't like, 90% of them are good. And only 90% of yours is good. And that is really hard for people to wrap their heads around. And when I say this, I think what everyone does is what people always do, which is because in their minds, I think everyone tells themselves, I don't have a problem with anybody. I'm very open-minded, except, and then they got that one little thing, whether it's rich people, hippies, Hasidic people, Amish, fraternity boys, rich men, whatever it is, everyone's got that group that they kind of hold on to. And so that's what I want to address is, so what do you do when you find a group that you know has got more than 10% that are bad, which is a mathematical impossibility. So we have to take a look at this. And there are 4 things really to think about when you find one of these examples, one of these exceptions. The first one, the most obvious, is that you're sitting at the sort of propaganda buffet a little bit and not knowing it. And that is not to be an insult, because every single person is subjected to propaganda all day, every day. There is no one who isn't affected by propaganda. It's like setting out to just not get any propaganda today is like trying to eat gluten-free. Okay, it's just in everything, and there's not much you can do about it. And so recognizing that, so maybe this group, maybe I'm thinking they're bad because I've been, getting propaganda. And one of the most effective forms of propaganda is to curate the anecdotes that you hear about a group to make you think that more than 10 is bad. That's very effective. And it's effective because of a human brain flaw where anecdotal evidence just far outweighs statistical evidence for us when it comes to an argument. I always use the example of my stepfather, who, until my mom finally made him start wearing a seatbelt, he didn't for years, and he said it was because he knew someone in high school who got in a car accident, had his seatbelt on, couldn't get out, and got burned, and therefore seatbelts were unsafe. And that is a very kind of ridiculous example, but we all do that. If we know someone from some group and they did us wrong, there's a good chance that we're going to apply that to all of that. It doesn't. The one that's relevant today is you can look at all the statistics you want about how safe a vaccine is or something, but if your cousin got really sick after they got a vaccine, you're not touching them, right? Because that anecdotal evidence is going to outweigh the evidence. So that's the first one. And the other possibilities for why a group is, like, let's say, for example, you're seeing on the news a bunch of people are setting fire to their own neighborhood, right? You see that sometimes in riots, looting and setting fire to their neighborhood. And you think, what kind of people would do that? Well, for those people, what you can realize is that they are under the influence of an external factor that could be removed. So sometimes it's people are under the influence of, like, say, a false prophet, right? Like when Moses got back and they were all worshiping the golden calf. 90% of them were still good. He just had to get rid of that golden calf, and then they could, get back to being good again. Another one is perhaps they're hungry, right? If you've ever seen a mob of hungry people, it's terrifying. There's a saying that at any given point, we're only 9 missed meals away from complete chaos in the world. So it could be that they're hungry, because hungry people have zero manners. Or it could be some other force that is affecting them, like geography, right? Perhaps all the people were put into a single area of the city where there's no jobs and no public transportation, right? And they're stuck there, and there's really not much they can do, and the schools all around them are bad, and they're kind of in a rut, right? But 90% of them are still good. right? And if you could fix their external situations, then you could see that, that you would start seeing that numbers reflected. And this is kind of a bit harsh, but to think about. But every year on September 11th, there's one thought that keeps coming back to me over and over, and I can't shake it. And it just haunts me every year. Is I think about the people jumping out of the top, the people that went up instead of going down, right? And you think. This is an example where you don't think, well, how dumb could they be? Did they really think they were going to survive that? No, what you ask yourself is, how bad, how awful did it get in there before people who may have been afraid of heights, jumped out of that window, right? And you got to apply that sometimes to other things where you see people and you say, how could a mother give their child to a coyote and have them go across the border? Or how could a parent who can't swim grab their kid who can't swim and pile onto an overcrowded boat that's going to then go across, rough seas and tip over and drown? And instead of saying, what kind of people are that? Isn't that dumb? What you need to ask is, because 90% of them are just like you got to ask, how bad is it where they are? How awful is it there that they would do that? Right? That's the question. And let me see. Sorry. And the last thing is going back to the example when you see people burning down their own neighborhood or going and attacking their own capital, something like that. What's going on there is, I believe, that people have lost hope. That's what people without hope looks like. And I don't think we fully appreciate how much hope keeps our society running, because hope is what makes people care about their credit score, pay their bills, pay their taxes, get a job, follow the laws, stand on lines. It's the hope that if they do everything right and they do what they're supposed to, then their kids might have a better life. And that's what they're hoping for, and that's why they follow all the rules. And if you take away all their hope, if they get to the point where they think, this system is such that no matter what I do, my kids will not have a better life than me, there is nothing that I can do, they stop standing in line, right? And they just rush up, and why? Why stand in line? Why pay your taxes? Why follow those rules? Why care about your credit score if nothing you do is going to make a difference? And so that's why it is so important to try to keep people hopeful. And it's not just the right thing to do, it keeps things stable, right? Just like the Romans were not known for being charitable, right? I would say they're pretty much uncharitable. But they gave out food or bread to the people all the time. Why? Because they weren't charitable. They knew that that is what needed to be done to keep stability. So a lot of times the right thing to do is what we need to keep things running smoothly. And that brings me to the idea of hope isn't that essentially what Jesus did, right? He found some rabble, right? Some people that were going on, having a rough time. They were kind of being pressured by the Romans, pressured by their own church, right? The fishing wasn't good. There wasn't a lot of work. I mean, you had some down on their luck guys who were probably like this close to throwing a brick through a liquor store window and just taking what they wanted. And then Jesus came and said, hey, gather around here. Let me talk to you a little bit. Let me show you some miracles that might help you get hope. Let me just explain some stuff to you. And with that, he took these people who were absolute, just hopeless. Probably some of them were up to no good, right? And he took them and he gave them hope. And what did they become? They became the founders, right, of of a startup that would essentially be an organization that did more good in the world than any other organization ever has, right? And they worked tirelessly for that, and at great risk for the group and for the group's goals. And that's all they needed, was a little bit of hope. Wait, except Judas, because there's always 10%. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Precious Lord, thank you for Derek's words. May the insights he shared from his military journey and life experiences seep into our hearts and minds and remind us that we need to be a hopeful people. Allow us to each apply the words that were shared today to our life situations in a way that will allow us and challenge us and invite us to grow in our faith and in our service and in thanking you for our servicemen and servicewomen. In your name we pray, amen. Let us continue to worship Christ by sharing our gifts.